Hello everybody, my name is Gavin Fairley, and today I will be teaching you guys about simultaneous or double shifts. First thing, what is a simultaneous or double shift? It occurs when demand and supply shift at the same time due to when two different events happen at the same time. And they result in changes in both equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. And 3 questions to ask yourself when you're dealing with this scenario. Does each event change demand or supply? Does either event increase or decrease demand or increase or decrease supply? And what are the new equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity, and how have they changed? First scenario, and a couple of different scenarios, increases in both demand and supply. This always increases the equilibrium quantity, but the change in equilibrium price is ambiguous or different because the increase in demand raises the price and the increase in supply lowers the price. And here's a couple of examples. So in this first graph, you see supply is increasing and demand is increasing, and there is the first equilibrium quantity, and that is going up. As I said, it always increases. The same one is in here. But when demand surpasses, the increase in demand surpasses the amount increased by supply, the price went up. But in this graph, you'll see that the change in supply is greater than the increase of demand, and so you'll have a equilibrium price that decreases. Let's move on. Decreases in both demand and supply. This always decreases the equilibrium quantity, as when the other one always increased the equilibrium quantity. But the change in price is also ambiguous because the decrease in demand lowers price and decrease in supply raises the price. So on this one, for this graph, supply decreased by a lot and demand decreased by only a little bit. So the equilibrium price shot up. It just increased a lot. But here, the equilibrium quantity decreased. Same on this graph, the equilibrium quantity decreased as well, but because the demand and supply were more even, they changed at a more even pace. The equilibrium price decreased by a fair margin. Okay, now we're getting into a little more complicated territory. When demand increases and supply decreases, there's an increase in price. The quantity will either raise, lower, or stay the same. If the change in demand surpasses the change in supply, equilibrium quantity will raise. But if the change in supply surpasses the change in demand, equilibrium quantity will decrease. And if both supply and demand change, and either change is smaller or bigger than the other, like they change at the same rate, the equilibrium quantity will not change. And here's some graphs illustrating that. So on this one, this first one, the equilibrium or the demand increased by a fair bit, but the supply only decreased by a tiny bit, as you see here. So on this one, equilibrium quantity it went up, and the equilibrium price went up as well. But on this one, and you see how the change in supply, as it's lower, the equilibrium quantity decreased a little bit. On this one, the demand shifted by a lot, but the supply shifted by a lot more than on this graph. So the quantity actually decreased on this one, and the price shot up again. And on this third one, equilibrium or the demand and the supply fairly increased and decreased at about the same rate. as you see here. So the equilibrium quantity and the second equilibrium quantity are the same, hence there's no change in this quantity. Alright, the last type of scenario that is here for you guys is when demand decreases and supply increases. There is a decrease in price. There's always a decrease in price, but there's either an increase, decrease, or no change in quantity, as with the last one. If the change in demand surpasses the change in supply, the quantity decreases. If the change in demand and supply are equal, quantity won't change. And if the change in supply surpasses the change of demand, the quantity increases. And I will show you guys here in a little bit. Right here. So on this one, demand and supply roughly are about the same. And they're better than this graph where it was kind of a little bit almost the same, but it's right on. They decrease, or the demand decrease and the supply increase are about the same. So there's no increase or decrease in quantity, but the price went down because of where demand is. The second graph, supply decreased by about the same, but demand didn't really decrease at all. So the quantity increased with this one because there's equilibrium, and the last equilibrium is right here. And then price went down because of where the equilibriums are. And then this third one, supply barely increased, and the demand decreased by a lot. So it surpassed the supply, and so quantity decreased and price decreased. Alright, here is an example of a situation that uses this double shift. Example, scientists find that oranges can be used to cure the current pandemic, COVID-19, but there are a new species of pests that eat up the oranges before harvest. What will happen to the supply and demand of oranges? And as this is just an example, I'll go through this one with you. So if you draw your supply and demand, that's demand 1, supply 1, you will just have that X, but then it's because oranges are now found to cure COVID-19, so that demand is going up by a lot. So there's the demand. And then, but there are a new species of pests that eat up the oranges before harvest, so that supply is going down a bit. So at the same time, demand will increase and supply will decrease. So your first equilibrium will be right here with quantity 1 and price 1. And because your demand increased and your supply decreased, the quantity will decrease by a little bit. But your price, because there are less oranges around, that price will shoot up, but the quantity is still a bit low. So that's all I have. I hope everybody learned something. I hope that this is one of the easiest concepts that I've learned in Miss Holy's econ class, and it's kind of easy to retain. So that's all I have for you guys right now. So I will switch over to Mason, who will go over maybe like 10 of these problems for you guys, and that's all. So here's Mason.
Problem 1. Scientists found that eating celery will cure cancer, but there's a new type of disease that is killing all of the plants before harvest. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and the price of celery? Pause. Problem 2. Jasper's Pancakes have gotten the privilege of getting a decreased rent and are now using the extra money for flour to make pancakes. But there's new competition with cookies breakfast, so less people are buying from Jasper's Pancakes. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and price of Jasper's pancakes? Pause. Problem 3. Science proves that ice cream will cure depression, but there is a new disease that is killing cows at an increased rate. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and price of ice cream? Pause. Problem 4. Casey's Bakery is struggling to create bread because the price of flour increased and less customers come to her bakery because Joseph has opened his own bakery. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and price of Cassie's goods? Pause. Problem 5. The price for cheese has decreased, making it easier for Roberto's Taqueria to make cheese quesadillas. Hada's Taqueria down the road has also gone bankrupt and closed, meaning Roberto gets more customers. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and price of Roberto's quesadillas? Pause. Question 6. Hamburgers have been found to increase people's self-esteem, and the amount of cows have increased over the years. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and price of hamburgers? Pause. Problem 7. Tomatoes have been found to be weakening people's immune systems, but the amount of tomato plants have increased. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and price of tomatoes? Pause. Question 8. Computer games have been found to decrease stress for young people, but the amount of computers being produced is decreasing. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and price of computer games? Pause. Problem 9. Spotify goes bankrupt and shuts down, causing a large increase of customers going and buying CDs. But because CDs haven't been in high demand in so long, they are very limited. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and price of CDs? Pause. Problem 10. Chef Smith has an apple pie restaurant. The price of apples has decreased, but a competing restaurant is taking all of Smith's customers. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and price of Smith's apple pies? Pause.
Alright, hello again. Now I will be going over all the problems that Mason just read to you guys, even though I thought he was gonna go over them with you guys instead of me having to do this. So, problem 1, scientists found that eating celery will cure cancer, but there's a new type of disease that's killing all of the plants before harvest. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and price of celery? So I made a graph showing that the demand of celery will go up because people want to eat celery now because they know it'll cure cancer. But the new type of disease that's killing the plants before harvest is decreasing the supply of the celery, so that causes quantity to go up and for price to go up as well. So if you had that, you got it right. Problem 2. Jasper's Pancakes have gotten the privilege of getting a decreased rent and are now using that extra money for flour to make pancakes. But there is new competition with Cookie's Breakfast, so less people are buying from Jasper's Pancakes. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and price for Jasper's Pancakes? So, for this graph, because Jasper's Pancakes had the decreased rent and they can buy more flour to make their pancakes, their supply will increase, as you see on the graph, but because of the new competition, their demand will decrease. because there's new competition. So that makes quantity stay the same. For the way I drew it, the quantity stayed the same, and the price increased. Problem 3. Science proves that ice cream will cure depression, but there's a new disease that's killing cows at an increased rate. What will happen to the 4 demand, supply, quantity, and price of ice cream? So for this one, I didn't draw arrows on the rest of these graphs. Sorry. For this one, because ice cream is found to cure depression, the demand of the ice cream will increase. But because there's a new disease that's killing the dairy cows, the supply will decrease. So you'll get quantity that will increase by a little bit, but price will shoot up. Problem 4. Cassie's bakery is struggling to trade bread because the price of flour increased and less customers come to her bakery because Joseph opened his own bakery. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and price of Cassie's goods? So, since the price of flour increased, the supply will decrease, and because less customers came to our bakery, demand is also decreasing as well, causing an increase in price and a decrease in quantity. Problem 5. The price for cheese has decreased, making it easier for Roberto's Taqueria to create cheese quesadillas. Hada's Taqueria down the road has also gone bankrupt and closed, meaning Roberto gets more customers. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and price of Roberto's quesadillas? So, because cheese is decreasing, or the price of cheese is decreasing, he can buy more cheese. So his supply will increase for the quesadillas, because Ada's Taqueria closed down, he will also get more demand because more people will go to his restaurant or his taqueria. And because of that, quantity will increase by a lot, but price will lower by a bit. Problem 6. Hamburgers have been found to increase people's self-esteem, and the amount of cows have increased over the years. What will happen to demand and supply, quantity, and price of hamburgers? So because of people are finding that hamburgers increase self-esteem, there will be more demand, because cows have increased, the supply of cows have increased, the supply increases for hamburgers, and so that results in the way I drew it. That resulted in no change in price and an increase in quantity. Problem 7. Tomatoes have been found to be weakening people's immune systems, but the amount of tomato plants have increased. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and price of tomatoes? So for this one, the supply will increase because nobody's buying tomatoes anymore because the demand decreased, and because there's more tomato plants, the supply will increase as well. The results of this will mean quantity lowers and price decreases. Problem 8. Computer games have been found to decrease stress for young people, but the amount of computers being produced is decreasing. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and price of computer games? So for this one, the supply will decrease because the amount of computers being produced is decreasing. But the demand will increase because it has been found to decrease stress. So in this, you can barely see it because of the way I drew it, but the quantity is decreasing by a very small margin. If you see there, it's very, very small. I had to redraw it. But the price goes up, as you can see there. Problem 9. Spotify goes bankrupt and shuts down, causing a large increase of customers for CDs. But because CDs haven't been in high demand in so long, they are very limited. What will happen to demand, supply, quantity, and price of CDs? So for this one, the supply of CDs decreases because there's so little of them, and because Spotify went bankrupt and shut down. There is more demand for them. There's more demand for that music. So the result of that will be a drastic increase in price, and quantity will decrease. Last one, problem 10. Chef Smith has an apple pie restaurant. The price of apples has decreased, but a competing restaurant is taking all of Smith's customers. What will happen to demand and supply and quantity and price of Smith's apple pies? So for this one, because the price of apples decreased, there will be more supply for apple pies. But because a competing restaurant is taking his customers, the demand will decrease. So that results in a slight increase in quantity and a lower or a decrease in price. So that's it, and I hope you guys learned something from today. I hope you got these right. And again, as I said earlier, this is probably one of the easiest lessons you will ever learn in this class. So good luck, and good luck on those AP tests at the end of the year, and that's all I have, so goodbye.